Fuoc Tuy Province, South Vietnam, 1967. An American liaison lieutenant stood inside a briefing tent, sweat soaking through his fatigues, as a senior officer unfolded a map across a wooden table. There was no long explanation, no lecture on enemy strength, no list of contingencies. The officer simply circled a stretch of dense green jungle with his finger, looked the lieutenant in the eye, and said one sentence: "You snap a twig in there, and you're dead." Then he added the part that made no sense: "And it won't be the Viet Cong who kill you." If you want more untold war stories like this, where the real battles happened in silence, not headlines, subscribe now and stay with us. This was not a barroom exaggeration whispered over warm beer in Saigon. It was standing procedure. American patrols were forbidden from entering the Australian sector of operations without triple clearance, authorization from American Command, Australian Command, and the SAS patrol already operating inside the jungle. Wander in by mistake, fail to announce yourself properly, or make the wrong sound at the wrong moment, and you could be engaged as an enemy without hesitation. The reason was brutally simple. The Australians shot at sound. Any sound that did not belong to the jungle. A snapped branch, a metallic clink from loose webbing, the hiss of a radio carrier wave, the smell of cigarette smoke, drifting where no smoke should exist. In the Australian SAS area of operations, those signals meant one thing: intruder. And intruders, enemy or ally, were treated the same until proven otherwise. The jungle did not forgive mistakes, and neither did the men who had learned to move inside it like ghosts. The Viet Cong understood this better than anyone. Captured documents recovered from political officers operating in the region contained a chilling directive circulated quietly through unit commanders. "Americans can be defeated," it read. "They depend on helicopters, artillery, and resupply. Australians are to be avoided. They are worse than us. They live in the jungle." It was not propaganda. It was operational guidance. In Fuoc Tuy, Viet Cong supply routes bent around Australian patrol zones like water flowing around rock. Entire base areas were relocated rather than risk contact. Fighters who had faced American battalions without hesitation refused assignments anywhere near Australian-controlled jungle. Fear, not firepower, was shaping the battlefield. And yet, the Australians were barely visible on American planning maps. At peak strength, the Australian SAS presence in Vietnam numbered roughly 150 men. 150 soldiers controlling a province that American planners had once estimated would require an entire division to pacify. The math did not work. The intelligence reports did not align. The body counts were unimpressive by Pentagon standards. And yet enemy activity inside the Australian sector collapsed. Patrols vanished. Caches exploded days after inspection. Units failed to report back and were never seen again. To American commanders obsessed with metrics and numbers, this was deeply unsettling. Wars, as they understood them, were won through mass, movement, and measurable destruction. You could count sorties. You could count shells fired. You could count bodies. But how do you measure an enemy who simply refuses to enter the battlefield at all? The Australians were not winning battles in Fuoc Tuy. They were denying the enemy the ability to fight. And to understand how that became possible, how a handful of men turned an entire province into a place both sides feared, we have to go back to the beginning, to 1966, to the first SAS patrol that stepped into the jungle and decided, deliberately, to stop being soldiers as the modern world to find them. The first Australian SAS patrols arrived in South Vietnam in early 1966, quietly inserted into what American planners considered a secondary area of operations. Fuoc Tuy Province was dense, humid, and unforgiving terrain, but it was not yet viewed as strategically decisive. For the Australians, it would become something else entirely, a proving ground. From the very first week, American advisors noticed that something was wrong, or more accurately, something was missing. There were no helicopters circling to mark movement, no artillery registering in the distance, no constant radio chatter filling the airwaves. The Australians went in and then disappeared. 4 men, sometimes 5, occasionally fewer, vanished into the jungle without resupply requests, without extraction schedules, without even routine radio checks. Days passed, then weeks, and still there was silence. Pentagon liaison officers began asking increasingly uncomfortable questions. Where were they? What were they doing? And why was Viet Cong activity in their sector collapsing almost to zero? The answers, when they emerged, disturbed American observers because they defied every assumption about modern warfare. Before each patrol, SAS troopers deliberately stripped away the markers of Western soldiers. Soap was abandoned days before insertion. Cigarettes were cut out entirely. Their diet shifted from American rations to rice, fish sauce, and local vegetables. This was not ritual or superstition. It was chemistry. Sweat, breath, and skin all carried scent, and scent carried identity. The Australians did not want to smell foreign in the jungle. They wanted to smell like the countryside itself, like farmers, like villagers, like the enemy they were hunting. Then the boots came off. Standard-issue jungle boots, the pride of American military engineering, were discarded without a hesitation. In their place, SAS troopers wore simple canvas sneakers with thin soles and almost no tread. To American special forces, this looked absurd. Boots meant protection. Boots meant survival. The Australians understood something different. Boots left evidence. Deep heel impressions, geometric tread patterns, unmistakable signs of Western soldiers moving through the jungle. Canvas shoes left almost nothing, faint impressions that could belong to anyone. After river crossings, canvas dried quickly while leather squelched and betrayed movement. More importantly, thin soles allowed troopers to feel the ground beneath their feet, sensing twigs and dry leaves before they snapped and announced death. Footwear for the Australians was not about comfort or durability. It was about invisibility. The most radical departure from American doctrine, however, was patrol size. U.S. Army patrols operated in platoon strength or larger, 30 men at minimum. The logic was inherited from 2 world wars. Mass provided security, firepower, and resilience in contact. The Australians rejected this logic entirely. Their standard patrol consisted of 4 or 5 men, and in especially sensitive reconnaissance missions, even fewer. American advisors considered this suicidal. A 5-man patrol had no reserves, no internal fire support, no ability to absorb casualties and continue fighting. If discovered by a larger enemy force, annihilation seemed inevitable. The Australians listened politely to these objections and then went into the jungle and proved them wrong. A large patrol could not hide. It left trails, made noise, and required constant resupply. The enemy always knew when Americans were coming, hearing helicopters long before arrival and seeing crushed vegetation long after they passed. The SAS patrol operated on the opposite principle. It did not exist to fight fair. It existed to avoid fighting entirely until the moment violence became unavoidable, and then to end it instantly. Its purpose was not to destroy the enemy through prolonged engagement, but to find him, understand him, and eliminate him on terms so unequal that resistance never had time to form. This was not conventional warfare as Americans understood it. It was hunting. That hunting was not improvised. Several SAS troopers had trained with Aboriginal trackers before deployment, learning skills refined over tens of thousands of years. They were taught that humans leave traces everywhere, even when they believe they are invisible. Bent grass, disturbed insects, broken spider webs, changes in bird behavior, these signs revealed presence, direction, and intent. The jungle spoke constantly to those who knew how to read it. The Australians learned to move in ways that allowed the vegetation to close behind them, erasing their passage almost as soon as it occurred. By the time American intelligence began to grasp what was happening in Fuoc Tuy, the transformation was already complete. The Australians had abandoned doctrine, comfort, and visibility. They had rejected the habits of modern armies and embraced something older, quieter, and far more ruthless. They were no longer moving through the jungle as outsiders. They were becoming part of it. And once that transformation was complete, the enemy was no longer fighting soldiers, but something he could not name, predict, or escape. What finally unsettled American intelligence was not the Australians' lethality, but their movement. The SAS did not advance through Fuoc Tuy the way soldiers were supposed to move. They did not patrol in lines or wedges. They did not push through vegetation. They did not measure progress in kilometers. They measured it in meters per hour. To American officers accustomed to aggressive tempo and constant motion, this seemed not just inefficient, but irrational. Yet it was this pace that made the Australians nearly impossible to detect. The technique was known among the SAS as ghost walking. Every step was placed deliberately, the foot rolling slowly from heel to toe, so weight was distributed without noise. Vegetation was not brushed aside, but gently parted and allowed to fall back into place. Hands moved ahead of the body, clearing the path before the body followed. A patrol might spend an entire morning moving less than 200 meters to reach an observation position, arriving without a single snapped twig or disturbed branch to mark their passage. In the jungle, speed was not survival. Silence was. This method of movement turned the terrain itself into a sensor network. The Australians learned to read Fuoc Tuy as a living system rather than inert ground. A broken spider web meant someone had passed within hours. Disturbed leaf litter revealed direction of travel. Insects behaved differently after human passage, and birds became unreliable allies for those who made noise, their alarm calls carrying farther than any radio transmission. To untrained eyes, the jungle looked static. To SAS patrols, it was constantly speaking. American patrols could not achieve this level of invisibility, largely because they could not afford to. Their doctrine demanded communication. Radios were checked at scheduled intervals. Status reports were mandatory. Silence triggered concern, then reaction, then rescue efforts. Helicopters were launched. Artillery was placed on standby. The assumption was that a unit not communicating was in trouble. For the Australians, silence meant the opposite. Silence meant success. A patrol that was not heard was a patrol that was alive and undetected. This difference had consequences the Viet Cong understood long before the Americans did. Enemy intelligence units had learned to track American patrols by monitoring radio traffic. Even encrypted transmissions revealed patterns. Regular check-ins indicated not just presence, but approximate location and timing. Absence of traffic suggested safe corridors where movement could continue unobserved. Against the Australians, this method collapsed entirely. There was nothing to monitor, no rhythm to exploit. The SAS patrols generated no electronic footprint, leaving enemy planners blind. The first signs of the impact appeared in intercepted Viet Cong radio traffic. Units operating in Fuoc Tuy began reporting patrols that never returned. Entire teams vanished without contact. Supply couriers failed to arrive, and when search parties were sent, they found no signs of engagement, only blood and abandoned equipment. American analysts noticed a shift in tone. This was not routine reporting. It was fear. The Viet Cong were not describing losses. They were describing something hunting them. Captured documents soon introduced a new word circulating among enemy ranks: Mong. Jungle ghosts. Phantoms that moved without sound, struck without warning, and vanished before retaliation was possible. The name itself revealed the psychological damage already taking hold. The Viet Cong were attempting to explain what they could not see by turning it into myth. The Americans heard fragments of these stories secondhand. A four-man patrol ambushing a much larger enemy force and disappearing before reinforcements could react. Entire trails abandoned after a single unexplained contact. Units refusing to move at night through areas known to be frequented by Australians. To American officers, these accounts sounded exaggerated, the kind of battlefield rumor that grew in the retelling. But the pattern was consistent, and the results were measurable. Enemy movement in the Australian sector was collapsing. What the Americans had not yet grasped was that the Australians were not simply killing enemy fighters. They were dismantling the enemy's sense of control. Warfare depends on predictability. Even guerrilla forces rely on routines, safe routes, and assumptions about where danger does and does not exist. The SAS erased those assumptions. Any trail could be an ambush. Any night march could be the last. Any moment of relaxation could mean death. The jungle itself had become hostile territory, not because it was occupied by large forces, but because it could no longer be trusted. The Viet Cong were being forced into a permanent defensive posture, reacting to threats they could neither locate nor avoid. This was not domination through numbers or firepower. It was domination through uncertainty. And as the fear spread through enemy ranks, the Australians remained invisible, moving at the pace of shadows, leaving behind no evidence except the growing silence of a province that no longer dared to fight back. For most American units in Vietnam, night was something to survive rather than exploit. Darkness favored the Viet Cong. Supplies moved after sunset, attacks came before dawn, and visibility collapsed beneath the jungle canopy. Without daylight, American firepower lost much of its advantage. The Australians turned this logic upside down. For the SAS, night was not a weakness. It was a weapon. Long before Vietnam, SAS patrols had trained to operate in near-total darkness, learning to navigate by sound, touch, and instinct rather than sight. In Fuoc Tuy, that training paid off. While other forces slowed at night, the Australians became more confident. Darkness concealed movement, masked sound, and erased distance. The jungle no longer belonged to the enemy. Their most dangerous technique was close target reconnaissance. In the hours before dawn, when enemy sentries were exhausted, 4- or 5-man patrols crept toward Viet Cong base camps. The final approach was made crawling inch by inch, feeling for tripwires with bare hands. Discovery meant certain death. There was no support, no rescue, no margin for error. Yet these missions were routine, not exceptional. The Australians believed ignorance was more dangerous than proximity. Inside the camp, they observed silently. They counted men, identified leaders, mapped defenses, and memorized routines. Sometimes they lay close enough to hear breathing or feel movement through the ground. After hours of stillness, they withdrew without leaving a trace. This intelligence fed into meticulously planned ambushes. The SAS chose locations with precision, setting short elimination zones where an entire enemy unit could be caught at once. When the ambush was triggered, it was over in seconds. Fire erupted, then silence returned just as quickly. The patrol did not linger. They vanished before reinforcements could respond. The psychological effect was crushing. Viet Cong units learned that pursuit led to more ambushes. Orders circulated not to chase Australian patrols. Base camps were abandoned after single contacts. Fear spread faster than casualties. By owning the night, the Australians stripped the enemy of certainty. In Fuoc Tuy, darkness no longer meant safety. It meant the Australians were close.